Hello, can you hear me? You're muted though, I can't hear you.
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Mary.
We have 8 more minutes to start.
Hey there.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I think. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sure.
Yes.
Okay,
We can hear you.
all right. So we're going to begin now. Some people are still. Yeah, so we're going to begin now. I welcome everybody to our webinar today. We're so glad that you could join us. This webinar is being hosted by Popular Robotics, and it's a very important career talk. And for those who couldn't join us today, we hope you are enjoying the replay. We're going to send the recording after the webinar. And sorry. Yeah, so today there are some few things we want you to note, that today's webinar will be in form of a Q&A panel, and after that there'll be time for you to ask our guest speakers some questions. So before the end of the webinar, please type in your questions in the chat box, and after the webinar we're also going to send you a short questionnaire. So please, we would like your feedback after the webinar ends. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded. So we're going to send the recording to you within 48 hours. Okay, so before we dive in, I'm your host today. My name is Mary Oladimeji, and I work in the marketing department of Popular Robotics. And Popular Robotics is a startup, it's a tech startup founded by one of our speakers here today. And it's an educational platform that is for everyone, beginner or experts alike. On Robocity, you can access robotics and AI courses. You can participate in robotics competitions. And we also have a community of fellow robotics enthusiasts. And next, we would like to start by welcoming our guest speakers for today. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start from Sot.
Hello, Mary.
Hi, Sot.
Glad to be here today.
Oh,
Be
sorry.
joining.
Sorry. Hold on.
Okay. I think you muted me temporarily, but it's fine. So thank you, Mary, for the introduction. And yeah, it's a real honor, and I'm really glad to be here to be speaking to everybody. So we're very glad to have you and hope that you will join us in exploring a lot of the options about how to start a career in robotics and AI. So my name is Sotirios Stasinopoulos, or you can call me Sot for short. I come from Greece, but currently I live in Beijing, China. I've been living in Beijing, China for the last 9 years. I took my diploma in electrical and computers engineering in 2011 from the National Technical University of Athens, and I specialized in computer vision. And then after coming to China, I studied a PhD in Tsinghua University here in Beijing, and finished that in 2017. Mainly was focused in robotics and AI. We worked mainly with humanoid robots, but also driverless bicycles during my PhD studies. Afterwards, I worked in the robotics industry. I worked for a robotics company here in China called Ubitech Robotics as a robotics perception engineer, and also project manager for their humanoid robots, and was involved mainly in tasks revolving artificial intelligence, computer vision, and SLAM navigation and localization. After that, and for the last 2 years, I started a startup called Popular Robotics, which is bringing you this webinar. And up to now, we have been successfully promoting our platform Robocity for helping people enter the field of robotics and AI, but also growing in it, getting skills, connecting to the industry, and trying also to help people with interesting projects to promote their projects. On the side, I'm also the co-founder and president of a company called Menathlon SA in Greece that mainly deals with renewable energies. Yeah, more or less that's it. As we said, I'm the founder of Popular Robotics, and I'll be glad to be sharing my information today.
All right, thank you very much, Sot. Max, can you please introduce yourself?
Cool. Yeah, so thanks, Sot, for inviting me. I'm currently based in Sydney, Australia. I was a lawyer by trade originally, which basically took me to China. And as a result of that, started to see innovation and things that were happening in the mainland of China about probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And that got me pretty interested in what AI was, what AI could do, and really just sort of sparked my interest. So it's not so much from an engineering perspective, it's more from a business modeling perspective. So essentially, after spending many years practicing as a lawyer in China, I basically moved my career as a split between sort of private equity, looking at different business models, and do some academic research on what AI can actually do and whether the business models actually make sense. So that's me in a nutshell, excuse me.
All right, thank you, Max. Our third speaker today is Artemi. Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So yeah, my name is Artemi. I'm from Russia, but I also been working and studying in China for about 6 years. And so I graduated in Beijing, China. That's where I met Salt as well. In the field of robotics and AI, but mostly for algorithmic part of robotics. And I worked in big companies, and actually got happy to work in startup companies as well. Got lucky to work in Siemens, and after moved to more industrial robotics, such as automated guided vehicles, and basically was based in Shenzhen for a while. And so, yeah, and so I'm more related to industrial robotics or so-called 4.0 industry, and yeah, 3.0 for sure. And I also work with drones and robotic arms and with 3D printing and some other technologies, but so yeah, basically more from engineering and algorithmic perspective. And currently I'm in St. Petersburg, and I moved to Russia to do some other exhibitions for JetBrains company. So yeah, I currently staying in Russia. It's a little bit rainy here, not the best weather, I would say. But yeah, here I am pleased to join this meeting. So yeah, that's it from my side about the introduction.
Thank you so much. So before we dive in, I'm going to introduce what we're going to talk about today. We are mainly going to be talking about the importance of a career in robotics and AI, the prerequisites and the skills you need to start a robotics and AI career, the robotics and AI jobs in high demand, and tips on how to prepare for your job interview. And we're also going to be talking about so much more. So I hope you enjoy it. So now we're just gonna get into it. My first question is for each and every one of you. Why do you think choosing a career in robotics and AI is important in this time? Sot, you can go first.
Thanks for the question, Mary. Actually, a career in robotics and AI is quite important for the society and how we're progressing in general. It's not just this year. For example, in the last decade, we've seen a great growth in a lot of AI technologies, and also like going forward onto robotics. So we've seen a lot of smart assistants, we've seen driverless cars, we've seen more effective drone applications, we've seen industrial automation getting, let's say, the majority of manufacturing nowadays. And we've seen service robots starting to become visible to everybody, getting in many different locations in everyday life. But especially this year, I mean, since this is the question, I mean, 2020 has been a quite interesting year for everybody, I would like to say. But robotics and AI has shown us how some of the, let's say, operations that we had done on a daily basis can be automated even further. We can use some algorithms based on AI and some physical representation from the robots aspects to complete a lot of tasks that before we thought were only like doable by people. So it's quite important to push a bit more these robotic applications and the AI applications in order to find solutions for, let's say, the COVID era, and also for the era after COVID. So a lot of operations will be done without the interference of people, and a lot of, even on the medical perspective or on telecommunications or other fields, a lot of these applications can be improved with AI. So it's really important to have more people joining this direction. We can't hear you.
Yep, no, it's an interesting question. I don't know how I'm placed necessarily to give career advice, since I've probably been through about 4 different careers in my time already. I think it's important just to ask the right questions in terms of like certain applications, what they do, what they look like. I mean, if for example, I mean, we all have to at some point in our career sort of go for the things that are in front of us, the interviews and the opportunities we can get. But I think it's also important to kind of figure out, you know, what it is that you want to get out of something, whether it's a purely research role or, you know, if there are other avenues to pursue associated with AI. I mean, these are very sexy phrases and a lot of people like to talk about them. And there are there's a whole other flip side to this, which is also decentralized technologies, which is something very different, right? I mean, the idea of AI in broad terms is really based on how much data you can collect on a particular thing and then what you can do with it, let's say in crude terms. But they're, you know, these are technologies, so they just do a certain thing. So I guess my personal perspective is, to a certain extent, it's not just about the importance of the technology itself, but it's, you know, if I had one bit of advice, it'd be kind of like, in the early parts of your career, try a lot of different things to kind of see where you want to get to in the longer term. You know, looking at really emerging technology. So whatever we learn and whatever we do now will be very important 20 years from now, because we're really just on the cusp of some of these technologies, right? As computer chips get more powerful, there'll be a lot more opportunities out there to do things that we didn't anticipate we could do. So yeah, I think it's kind of like, you only have certain pathways in life you can take. You may not get a certain interview, or you may not get a certain role, but really just the opportunities that are in front of you, try to work out, you know, my only advice would be have some kind of idea of like what it is that you actually want to do, and look at it with a more long-term sort of lens.
Thank you, Max. Artemi?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, question. Could you repeat the question, please? Like more precisely, what's
I said, why
everyone
do you
forgot already?
why do you think a career in robotics and AI is important in this time?
Well, yeah. So first of all, we can see that there is like a rapid increasing in all parts of technologies in general. And so, as the guys already said, as our other speaker said, that there are so many different sensors and appeared this decade, which we weren't able to get before. And as I remember, there was a man who said that robotics is actually going to die, because we kind of reached the top tier of all this sensor-wise part. But basically, the thing is that we got so many different technologies, which brings robotics to the different level. Like I already said, 4.0 and probably higher. So and like we can see robotics everywhere so far, from delivery robots, from to actual self-driving cars, and just the industrial automation. So just fields are so different and so versatile. So I believe that this is something which we actually have to jump right into, and probably people who are going to be into this industry are going to increase also quite rapidly.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Max. You mentioned that you were a lawyer, so I would like to ask, like, but you later went to do your PhD in your PhD focus was in AI ecosystems. So how easy was the transition from law to something highly technical, and what advice do you have for those who have a different career and want to switch to one in robotics and AI?
Yeah, so just to preface that, I'm not an engineer. I don't really code. I just muck around with code. My PhD was more based on like the business models of AI and what can be done. But I think, look, a lot of people, it seems, on this call are from all over the world, and everyone kind of has a different background based on, you know, even national university systems. So, you know, when I went to university, it was more than 15 years ago when I did my undergrad. And in Australia, law is an undergrad degree. So I was already practicing as a lawyer when I was about maybe like 22 years old. I started working as a lawyer. So I had plenty of time to explore different things. It's not the same in other countries. Like in America, for example, a lot of people are familiar with America, but it's a post-grad degree. So you have to do undergrad and then you can do it. So I also started my career, you know, at a time when like AI wasn't such a powerful thing. I mean, the talk around it, understanding the technology, understanding the significance of what it was definitely a lot less understood. When I, if I had my time again, maybe I would have done engineering as an undergrad. I don't know. So I think it's important for us to understand that we're also kind of on the cusp of, different emerging technologies, and we don't know exactly where they're going to take us. So, for me, I didn't necessarily have a big plan, but it sort of goes back to what I was saying before of, I realized at the time, the thing that sort of threw me was WeChat. When Weixin became really popular in China, at the time I was living in Shanghai, and I knew something different was happening. I knew there was something going on, and I started to understand, like I was reading a lot about big data and those kinds of things at the time. And, like if you look on LinkedIn, people write all kinds of nonsense on there, like I'm a futurist or I'm this, I'm that, I'm like 8 different things. But it is sort of like part of our careers today is to try to understand like what will happen in the future and what will be important. And so for me, I just kind of was like surfing the waves that I thought would be important. So it's not like I had a grand strategy and I didn't exactly reinvent myself, but as a result of that, when I look at different things now from an investment perspective where I work, at least it's important to kind of understand the technologies, at least at a sort of theoretical level. But a lot of investors, when they make investments, they actually don't really care about the technology so much. They often don't really understand it. They just look at the numbers and they look at the business models and they look at, that's all that's important to them. So, when we have a different career path, and I won't go on too much longer, I think it's just important to understand that sometimes your academic training or the early parts of your career or later parts of your career might influence the way people look at a different problem. So, there are in investment, people in professional investors and those who look at venture capital and those kinds of things, they often just look at the numbers. So, whether something's plausible or not, or a particular technology is going to work may not be that important to them. So to round that all off, it's like my career wasn't so much planned. I just kind of went with what I thought was interesting and important at the time.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Max. My next question is for Sot. I think many people here are very interested in how to start a robotics and AI career. And my question to you is that what should one study if one wants to become a robotics and AI? What should someone study if they want to have a career in robotics and AI? And what sort of pathways are there for them to have a career in this field? And okay, and adding to that, what's some people probably didn't study something related to robotics and AI, but they're interested in this field. So what sort of way can they start a career?
Well, of course, if we're talking about studies, of course, traditional education is always in play. I have a PhD. I know a lot of the other speakers also have masters or PhDs. Of course, I will not, let's say, claim that traditional education is not worthwhile. Of course, if you have the dedication and you have the time, of course, you should start early on and get, let's say, a direction and more engineering degrees. For example, you can get computer science degrees, you can get electrical engineering degrees, mechanical engineering degrees, let's say computer engineering. All of these can help you, let's say, get the basics for starting a career in robotics and AI. But what I want to for people to understand is that these, of course, will give you very technical skills and a lot of theory behind them. For instance, we study a lot of theoretical knowledge that may not be applicable later on. So we study a lot of math and a lot of, let's say, physics, which is good for getting you prepared to tackle a lot of different problems. But sometimes a lot of this knowledge is not, let's say, helping you take on specific problems or specific tasks that you're gonna use, you're gonna go up against later on if you work in this field. And also there's the other direction where you now can apply AI or let's say, robotics to a lot of industries and a lot of different segments. So people from, let's say, a law background, or people from more finance background, they may have studied that, like, let's say, earlier on, but they still have the chance to get some skills on AI and robotics, so that they can, let's say, transform these fields onto the new era, because a lot of AI and robotics is penetrating a lot of the more traditional industries, such as medicine, or, as I mentioned, let's say, the more traditional industries of, like, let's say, the legal department, bringing a lot of innovations about how data is processed or organized to give better suggestions or solutions. So what I'm trying to say is that you can have a formal education, and of course is going to give you a better understanding, but it's not necessary that you need to go the traditional way of getting a degree in computer science to be able to use AI tools in your industry. So for instance, right now, there are a lot of people that come from a specific industry, or they did not have a lot of, let's say, technical skills, that get a lot of education from online sources, especially in this year of the COVID era. They're getting, let's say, online education about how to use these AI tools, or getting some skills in robotics. And that is also equally important for people that want to get into this industry. So, of course, traditional education, as I mentioned, and now a lot of skills that can be taught through online learning can bring you to a level that you can try to look for, let's say, employment in this industry. And as a final comment, of course, that's also what we're trying to do with Popular Robotics, trying to help people in this, let's say, stage where whether you have previous experience or not, you can still get some skills, no matter what part of your career you are, and no matter if you have technical background or not.
Okay, all right, so thank you. My next question is for Artemi. It's actually for every one of you, but I want Artemi to start first. It's that, what tips can you provide for job seekers or university students who want to have a career in this field?
All right, so probably I would recommend and suggest, first, don't worry. And if you're thinking, because like when I first started going and jumped into robotics, and I was just Googling and looking for Wikipedia what this thing was. I was like 17 years old, so I was like a very young boy. And I realized that it just consists of so many parts, such as like mechanical engineering and electrical engineering, computer science, control theories, and like so many different aspects. And I was thinking that you actually have to be perfect at all of these stages and all of these parts to be a robotics engineer. And basically it appeared to be that you don't have to be absolutely perfect at all of those things. You have to maybe have brief understanding how things work, but in general they always dig into one direction from like 4 or 5 of those. So I would first say that you don't have to worry about being perfect at all of these parts, and choose something which you are more interested in, like robotics wise. You can obviously go for AI, and you can go for more like algorithmic robotics, which is more like math related and programming. So if you are interested more in mechanical engineering, then you can go and dig into some CAD/CAM system and some different circuits, boards, and maybe C programming, what you're more interested. If you're into AI, then you'll probably go for machine learning, deep learning, and other aspects. And so for me, when I started going for algorithmic parts, I just jumped into coding, Python, C++. So, well, yeah, my suggestion, don't worry, and choose something which you are more suitable to, and start learning maybe from the basics, and get back to the project, start doing some projects, and well, you eventually go back to basics anyway, because it happens with everyone that you do a project and eventually you just realize that you forgot how to do some mathematical aspects which you used to learn somewhere in your bachelor degree, or maybe some Jacobian calculations or some other thing. which no one can take out of your head right away. So you can just go Google it. And so this is a good part of programmers and robotics in general, that you can always Google. You're not a doctor. Doctors never Google, but we always can go and Google. So be free to use sources, and then if you're easier to dig into and look for information, you can manage to do nice programming, then you can try to go for robotics. Seems to be a good field to be in, as we already told. So yeah, cheer up.
All right, thank you. Max?
I think it's a very interesting time to have this conversation because, as I said, there are people calling in from all over the world, and COVID-19 has affected very many countries in very different ways. So I don't know, from everyone's home country or wherever they're looking for jobs, how the job markets look right now, whether that's a thing or whether it's about upskilling yourself while you're doing something else. I think it's important for all of us. Like my own year this year was, it was interesting. A lot of projects that I was working on were derailed by COVID. So there's a few things to think about. I think one is that you have to always back yourself in. It's really hard. I think it's like I said, if you're going for a job at this particular point, I don't know what that looks like. It's also important, I think, to have a sort of a human-centered approach to AI. That automation, we all know there's a lot written about how it may take away jobs from the job market. So whether that affects certain industries as well. I was listening to an interesting podcast last night about India and about entrepreneurship in India, and how, basically graduates were all looking to get, sexy companies on their CVs because that looks really good. But the person who made the podcast was saying, no, we should be looking to build, small business in India and look at what problems we can solve for India. So, I think it's a combination of factors in terms of whether you're looking for something, whether you want to upskill, or whether, there might be, a problem that you want to solve, right? So, so from my perspective, I don't really I'm reluctant to give anyone advice about anything right now because this is a very uncertain time for the world. But, it's simply a case of, really trying your best to figure out what you want and doing the best that you can to go after that.
Right, thank you, Max. Right. So, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, of course, a lot was covered by the other speakers. For me, I would just say that, sure, we live in quite an interesting period of time where job seeking is not as easy as it was, and especially with a lot of people not being able to leave their homes. So I would mainly get okay, if people are insisting on finding a job, a lot of say freelance tasks are available. So you could maybe try your skills on a freelance project. If you are a university student, I would say your best, let's say your best shot right now would be either at taking on some, let's say, online learning that would get you on track to get some hands-on experience. So try to get something that would get you involved in a specific project for a specific task, and then try to learn how to deal with all the processes and the problems of that task. So get some hands-on experience in that kind of matter. And also try to maybe look for an online internship. There are quite some online internships around, and that will also give you an idea of different types of, let's say, jobs in the field. For example, you can try and see if some more closely related to some part of AI, let's say using, I don't know, neural networks doing a specific task would be better suited to you and what you would like to do later, or you would like to do something that's more closely related to programming hardware. So my suggestion is, if you are in the field and you don't really have a specific direction right now, and because of the uncertainty, I would just say better try to work with either some specific projects, giving you some hands-on experience from online education, try to get maybe an online internship in a company that would also let you get some experience, but also some better self-knowledge about yourself. And then, as I said, if your skills are good enough, you can also try some, let's say, freelance tasks available in websites.
All right, thank you, sir. My next question is also for Sot. It's you mentioned freelancing and getting internships, but like, what are the skills that the people who are interested in this field, what sort of skills are they supposed to have? I mean, hard skills and soft skills.
Well, that is a very, let's say, broad question, as I said, because there are different areas of robotics, different areas of AI, and a lot of different application fields. So maybe some skills can be used for some areas, some applications, some may not. But for example, if you are trying to work a bit more on the AI side of things, of course, you need to have good knowledge of machine learning algorithms. You need to be able to use some of the frameworks and tools that are available right now, such as TensorFlow, PyTorch Cafe, and either some frameworks like Fast AI that can get you, let's say, on the same level as some of the experts on the field right now, like, because most of the professionals are using these tools to create, let's say, some neural network models in order to deal with processing of the data. You need to be good at data processing, as we said, data collection, and you need to also, apart from like the very fancy now, let's say, neural networks and their different types, like the convolutional ones or recursive one, you probably need to also spend some time to understand some other, let's say, machine learning algorithms in order to understand which ones you can use in each situation. Then on the robotics aspect, as Artemi also mentioned, it's a combination of a lot of different aspects, such as from the hardware perspective, you need to be able to design the mechanical structure. So you need to have some skills about design, if that is your direction. Let's say a 3D design, mechanical design, structural design. If you are doing more the electronics part, you need to know how to deal with electronics, board design, and then control of components, sensors, and let's say some integration softwares such as maybe ROS, that is a middleware where things are can be connected in the programming level. So on the hard skill level, you need to first of all realize what is your direction, and then try to understand, let's say, the different skills that are the most commonly used right now, and then get a good grasp on them by using them in some specific task-related projects. Soft skills. What I thought that it's a common understanding that AI and robotics engineers don't have any soft skills. Isn't that true? Well,
we talk with each other.
well,
we can talk.
No. We talk with each other only when we need to, right? No, of course, we also need to have soft skills. Of course, if you're a freelancer and you just take project requirements and you, let's say, do the job on your own and then produce a result, you may think that there are also no soft skills involved, but still, even in this situation, you need to be good at understanding what the client or what the project, let's say, responsible is asking from you. So you need to understand the project requirements very well, because no matter how smart you are, if you are actually doing or how much skilled you are, if you are creating an algorithm that doesn't produce the result that is going to be used, then it's not going to work. So you need to have good understanding skills of what is required for this project, and also learn to integrate feedback from your colleagues and also from, let's say, the clients that are going to be using the solution, so you can improve the product according to their requirements.
All right, thank you, Sot. My next question is for Artemi. It's how do people know what area of specialization to go into? Like for those who are confused of what area to go, what advice do you have for them?
Well, it's a good question though. So I would probably, since we are holding the robotics related stuff, so I would say yes, guys, go for robotics and enjoy robotics. It's a good field to be in, but basically, as Sot already also mentioned, there are several parts of robotics, or I would say several fields where you can go for, whether it's AI or it's more algorithmic way of doing robotics. So since Sot is more specialized in AI area, I would more pushing towards algorithmic robotics from my side, since I'm just in there. But it's always like you just have to be good at one thing, as I already told. But for algorithmic robotics, I would say that you just have to learn. For programming skills, it will be Python and C++. You don't need to know C# for this, since it's more, I mean, it would be a good idea to have C# knowledges as well, just to know C++ better. But mostly of robotics is done in whether Python or C++ for now. What would be my suggestion for those people in the field? As Sol already also mentioned, go and learn ROS. It's an amazing place to start with. It's a good platform. They have figured out how to do all this API connection between nodes, so-called nodes. And it's a good place to just jump right into and look for some basic robotics algorithms, whether it's going to be path planning or localization, or maybe you're more interested in pick and place. So they have simulation. They have a they have a connection with so-called Gazebo simulation. One is R&D, and other one is more for maintenance. Like if you maintain some already done project where you're more working on, right? Like it's like mean time between failures. When if you're into R&D, just hurry up to implement a new algorithm and try different things to show demos in your companies. But if it's more about industrial, production robotics, then you have to maybe just dig into one problem and just try to solve to figure out this one problem to make sure that your robot is not gonna
to kind of show that angle.
Right, for sure. The Python is a good thing for going through algorithms. Like, for example, for Ross, there are actually lots of questions in the chat. So the Sachin, sorry if I pronounce it wrongly, but he just asked about simulation software. And so it's Gazebo. Maybe I didn't mention this. So for Ross, all the algorithms are already, basically, many algorithms are already in. You can use them, but to actually understand it, you can go for Python and just write something in Python with some 2D simulation using some matplotlib or any libraries for 2D simulation. So yeah, Python is a good thing for robotics, for testing.
I thank you. My next question is for Max. As a result of the COVID-19, so many people have lost their jobs, and I would like to ask if this is different for robotics and AI jobs, and how do you think this trend will change in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't necessarily have a brilliant answer to that question. I think everything with COVID-19 is moving pretty fast, right? It seems like now there was at least 9 vaccines that were sort of looking promising about a month ago, and 3 are now being trialed very heavily. So we could be in a situation where by, let's say, the end of next year, you know, maybe it's possible most of the world is actually vaccinated. So, you know, that's all in flux, and nothing at the moment is certain. That's the first thing I'd say. And I'm not an expert on this by any means. I'm not an epidemiologist. Actually, mostly when I want to get an idea of where I think the world sits in terms of COVID, I look at stock market analysts, because people who invest in listed equities look at pharmaceutical companies, and they look at, you know, and that's where I get my information from, because they're the guys who are putting the money into these companies, where vaccines sit, and that's basically where I get my information from. Look, going to be tourism industry that's not good right now. I mean, most international borders are closed. Different cruise liners, cruise ships, that kind of, you know, tourism is completely shut down. And then all of our countries are being affected to different levels depending on where you live right now. You know, it's not standard where I'm from. We're basically COVID free. The whole of Australia is basically COVID free now. But to do that, we had 5 months of complete lockdown in my home city, which was very tough, and a lot of people lost their businesses. And then you've got, you know, other parts of the world, Europe, America, India, things are not looking as good, although the India rates dropped a little bit. So, you know, when we have these kinds of sort of, for us in our lifetime, obviously it's unprecedented. You know, if you, for example, shorted cruise line stocks in January, you made a fortune, right? Because no cruise liner in the world could run. So, you know, for us to look at where does AI sit, where does automation sit, where are the opportunities? There are lots and lots of opportunities. You know, what kind of research, you know, if you're in an R&D role, what kind of research could solve a problem associated with COVID? Those are great questions. You know, how much will the world change after COVID is really the question. Appointment today, and I just took it on a platform, whereas prior to 6 months ago, I always had to physically go to the doctor's office. You know, that may not be a thing for AI and automation, but clearly it's a behavioral change where people are using technologies differently. And a lot of those things are not going to change. You know, I look at life differently actually now. The way I want to live my life, how I want to do things. I actually want to live at a slower pace. You know, prior to this year, I always spent at least between 1 and 3 months in China doing work. This year, I haven't had any time in China, and it's okay. Like, I don't mind it. I've been home. I've had more time with my family, and that's okay. So, you know, I'm not giving you an answer from a specific sort of AI robotics perspective, but what I'm saying is all this is in flux. And in any time when there was the global financial crisis, which was only 11 years ago, a lot of people thought the world was going to end, but somehow the world economy sort of bounced back. So I think one thing that probably, just if I was to say anything, obviously healthcare's had a massive boost. Venture capital for, you know, AI diagnostics was something that looked really good, but the business models weren't really working, and a lot of those companies were not really profitable. I think for AI, in terms of, you know, just in general, just in terms of different financial products, let's leave it at that. It could be more complicated than that. But, you know, again, the moral of the story is, you know, there are certain industries that will never be the same after COVID. And that creates lots of opportunities for AI and robotics.
Thank you. My next question is for Artemi. What's the work-life balance of people in this field, in the field of robotics and AI? Can you hear me? Okay, I think you muted yourself.
All right, some technical issues. I'm sorry for that. So yeah, the question is about work-life balance for people who works in robotics field. Just repeat it for someone who didn't get it. So I would say, well, we still can have girlfriends, so it's a good part. And girls who are in robotics field can have boyfriends. It's not that intense, let's say, but it really depends on the field you are in, because obviously there are moments when, if you are, for example, working in the robot or warehouse maintenance, there could happen days when something just gets broken, and since it's a warehouse and it's just malfunctioning, you have to go and fix this thing. So yeah, it basically happened that we stayed long nights fixing some things in the robots. Because robots, as I already told, always break. Obviously, it doesn't break that often, and MTBF reaches more for 10,000 hours. It's quite a lot, but apparently, if you have like about 50 robots maintaining the huge warehouse, some of those is going to have some issues. So if you are working in maintenance of these kind of robots, then probably you're going to have some time when you have to go and fix things up very quickly. But in general, I would say you can have a nice office 9 to 5 job easily, and actually a very exciting job since you're working with the hardware. You're gonna have time bringing up some new robots and maybe even build one yourself, or maybe you're gonna have some time to build a table for your robotic arm if you're doing some pick and place things. You're gonna jump and to get some drone which gets stuck on the floor, for example. So it's a fun work. It's a fun job to work in the robotics field, and you're not gonna have a back pain just sitting boringly in a office chair. So since you're just working with the hardware, so yeah, it's pretty exciting. I think I'm really interested in what other people think who are working in more AI industry, because for me, since I'm working more with the hardware, just programming self-driving cars and programming industrial robots, it happened that I was just sitting in the huge robots and just driving around the warehouse. So yeah, it's fun from my side, but I'm very interested in how it feels like for AI robotics part. So maybe Sot can say something as well.
From my perspective, of course, I've also done more things with the hardware, and it's fun for sure, and you get a lot of enjoyment. But like, since I'm also doing, I've been doing a lot of work with algorithms and data collection and data process. That thing can really also take a long time, and you can spend a lot of times debugging algorithms, and that can, of course, let's say, be enjoyable sometimes. Sometimes it's kind of nerve-wracking in terms of like, you can't find what the matter is, what the problem is, until, let's say, later on when you figure out it was an inconsistency of 2 libraries, let's say, release date. So there are issues that can be quite annoying sometimes. But of course, as I said, it comes with a job. Like when you're a coder, programmer, or working with data, you need to understand that there will be times that you will need to spend a lot of time debugging. But yeah, the enjoyment, especially if you are getting to see a final result, you're not just creating, let's say, a part of a code just for somebody else, but you may actually see its application on a robotics application, or let's say in an app that is doing something specific, and you see people using it and you see people actually enjoying it. I think that really brings a lot of enjoyment. But yeah, like there have been times in the past, because of course now I am doing a little bit more startup work, and that is more than full-time employment. But even when I was, let's say, doing more engineering work, there were times that I would have to stay a bit later, like dealing with my code. But it depends also on what kind of, let's say, conditions you accept for yourself, and what the conditions are for, let's say, the company you're working at. For example, a lot of tech companies, especially in China, they kind of have a little bit skewed, let's say, work-life balance, meaning they do let's say 6 days a week, 9 to 9 kind of schedule. It's quite here in China, and that is acceptable, and people like go along with it because it's the culture of the country, and it's also the culture of the industry. But in other, let's say, countries and other companies, it depends on the company culture. It can be, let's say, the deadlines can be more rigid, but you can manage your time more flexibly, and it depends on your performance.
Thank you. I would like to ask Artemi, speaking of responsibilities for people in this field, what can you expect working as a robotics software engineer like you are? What sort of things do you do day to day?
All right. So as I just told that the first, recently I was mostly working in maintenance of the project. And we were doing the warehouse robotics for warehouse automation. So we had like 12 robots which were driving around, picking a box and delivering it somewhere, basically sorting the big warehouse. So for me, day-to-day life past year was mostly about maintaining these kind of robots. When things are getting broken, you can go and basically spend some time fixing it and trying to add some other new features. But also, if one other project I just recently also worked for was an automated guided vehicle, just some kind of robot which is more slant-based, which drives around the warehouse. It's more fun. So this one requires looking for information and maybe implementing some algorithms which are currently in the robotics field. So for responsibilities, I would say if it's maintenance wise, then you have to be ready to commit at some days and go and stay late, as we just talked about, we just told about. And for this kind of R&D research, you probably have to be a fast learner. You have to be ready to grasp any chunk of information and sort it out properly and pick some things which are actually relevant for your robot. So probably you have to be good at looking for information and just looking for forums and looking for some other things which are needed for your project, for your demo, or for your research. And it just comes with time. I think you kind of just cutting off the irrelevant thing when you get to know how robotics algorithms are made in general. So just by implementing some several algorithms, it's just getting much better. So yeah, their responsibilities are writing a nice code to make sure that your coworkers are not going to mess it up with your code, and just make a nice README files for proper information so everyone can also understand what you're doing. Because mostly of robotics projects are actually built in a team. So as Sot said about soft skills, you probably have to be able to speak with your coworkers, at least to kind of jump into the project and work together as a team. So yeah, talk with people, programmers, and yeah, these are like skills which I would definitely point out is being committed if it's needed, being ready to work intensely if deadline is coming, if you're working for some big company, and be a smart learner, get ready to just understand some part of the library or maybe some algorithm very fast. So well, yeah, because robotics, as we mentioned several times, is just so many different aspects. So you probably, if you don't know it very nicely, you need to be able to jump into this aspect and learn it or get to the stage which is needed for your project. Yeah. So these are two skills. Yeah.
Thank you. My next question is for Max. Apart from job-seeking skills, what should young participants focus on if they're interested in this startup aspect of robotics and AI?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's specific to this, but I think there's a couple of things. I think at some point you need to have a lot of humility when you're in this process. But I also think that, you know, this probably isn't spoken about enough, but if you're going to join a startup, that you should actually ask really, really good questions. So on the one hand, you know, you need to understand what the startup's actually trying to do. If you are going to take like an engineering position or something in one of these companies, you should really understand the business and really ask the right questions, and really make sure if you are able to get a job at one of these places or an offer, that you have some advice in terms of what they're offering you, in terms of, you know, what kind of salary package it is, coupled with what that looks like if there are some, you know, equity options or whatever on the table. If you are going to be in that position, and I think a lot of people may be in this job market now looking to join a startup, just make sure you ask the really, really hard questions. And if someone tells you that a particular product can do X, Y, and Z, make sure you ask the right questions, whether that product's actually capable of doing that. Because I've seen a lot of startups this year in particular, people threw out products really quickly because of COVID, and they promised a lot of things and they actually couldn't do what they said they could do, and that puts a lot of people under a lot of pressure. And even sometimes funded startups can actually get money from VCs, venture capital, that they don't really care. So, you know, people look at venture capital as being very sexy, but actually oftentimes they will like just basically throw darts at a dartboard, because you're looking at people who have lots of money to play with. So a little bit of money for a particular startup is not such a big deal to them. Even if they lose it, it doesn't mean anything, because they just have that one startup that they back that's maybe done really well for them. So, you know, in any job interview, if it's for a big corporate or whatever, be humble, to repeat what I said in summation. Make sure, you know, you present yourself as someone who's keen to learn and willing to work hard, because in an early part of your career, that's really all they want. Someone that they can work really, really hard, and that might not be that pleasant for you. But if you are going to take the risk and join a startup at any point, make sure you really believe in the startup you're joining. Otherwise, it's, you know, it just could be a wasted year of your life, or it could be, you might learn a lot from it. Maybe it's not wasted, but it can also be very stressful for you if it's a very unstable environment.
Thank you. My next question is for Sot. It's actually a two-in-one question. I would like to know the top jobs in AI and robotics right now. And earlier you mentioned getting experience is important to start a career. So what's the best way to get industry experience for those who are interested?
Well, as for the highest in demand jobs, as we mentioned, like this year has been a little bit crazy in terms of which industries are, let's say, getting more attention. Of course, let's say traditionally in the last 2 or 3 years, let's say driverless cars engineers, let's say engineers that were working with the say automated systems for these kind of let's say autonomous ground vehicles have been really much sought after. Engineers that, of course, can use, let's say, big data to analyze them through machine learning algorithms. So anything that had to do with you being an engineer that can process big data and create models that can make sense of that big data in a better way. So these kind of, let's say, engineers were like really popular. Before that, like more speech recognition, now not so much. I mean, still a big demand, but engineers that processed, let's say, audio data for smart assistants, they were, let's say, a bit popular before that, 2 or 3 years. Now a lot of drones engineers, let's say, for different applications. But if you take it specifically for AI, a lot of financial analysis engineers, whether they are working with, let's say, more investment or stock market, let's say, models for like telling people how to invest their money, but also some jobs now, as Max mentioned, in the healthcare industry, let's say prognostics, let's say big data analytics of people's, let's say, biometric data. These are like also quite popular, especially this year. And then of course, there are a lot of other fields that are quite popular. For example, the automation of a lot of other industries. So in general, you need to have a specific skill set. If you can deal with big data, you can do a lot of, let's say, machine learning algorithms on this big data, then you can have different applications. So it's not about, let's say, your field in specific, but what kind of skills you bring along with you. So these AI engineers have been like really, let's say, sought after lately. And then your second question was how to get more industry experience. Of course, if you can get a job, you can get a lot of good industry experience, especially in your field. But if you think that the skills that you have are not good enough to land you a job in the specific field, you can try, of course, getting an internship, as I mentioned, an unpaid one. So a lot of companies would welcome this. To get you to offer free labor for them for, let's say, a period of 2 to 3 months. And in that way, you could learn, let's say, something from that specific industry and see also if it is a match for you. And also take some online competitions. There are platforms from online competitions that work with real problems. For example, also on Robocity, we have some online competitions that can get you to give projects or try your skills on specific items and see how you compare with others in the industry. And also, as I mentioned before, you can also try some freelance tasks. If you think that your skills are not good enough for very complicated ones, maybe you can see if there may be simpler tasks that you can try to work on. Maybe they're not paying so well, but you can actually test the waters about what the requirements are from customers, paying customers. And then you can see that like if you can produce a result that is up to these standards. So these are mainly 3 things that I think can help you get more industry experience.
All right, thank you very much. My last question is for all of you. It's that what sort of, can you hear me?
Sure. Mary, we cannot hear you anymore.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Sure.
Okay, yeah, so I said, what sort of advice do you wish you had gotten before you started your career? I think, Artemi, you can go first.
Advice for people. So I'm gonna double ask advice for people who got their career in robotics in general, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, I have already talked about this a little bit, that there are lots of different, like, okay, so let's start that maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was pretty complicated to get into robotics using online sources, since there wasn't much of those. But nowadays there are so many sources, like online schools, like YouTube videos, or any different types of startups doing this. Popular Robotics source, which is actually pretty good as well. I checked some courses and even took a part of it, partly. So there are lots of resources online to go to robotics, and there are lots of explanations and tutorials how to jump into the field. Obviously, you need to understand what programming is. You need to understand the basic algorithms in a field. And well, what else? I would say that just if you are interested in a field, you're gonna get just caught by robotics and get very excited just doing this. So you're not gonna notice that you have any problems with looking for any, how would it's called? Looking for problems learning, because I mean it's a very interesting thing. And like if you're not interested in AI, just go and do this algorithmic part. If you're not interested in this, then go for start doing your project, maybe. It's not last. It's not like last but least, but there are so many different things in robotics. So choose what you like and try.
So I've got two, very briefly. Don't relate to AI, but one is your career is not linear. So don't necessarily think what you do at age 25 is going to be what you're doing at age 50, because that's not going to happen for anybody in the world anymore. There used to be a time in some places where you would work the same job for 25 years. That's not going to happen. And the other thing I'll say that someone told me a few years ago, it's been very powerful for me, is that the world is not about you. And when you realize that, you'll be a lot happier. So if you're looking for a job and you don't get a job, or you email someone and they don't respond to you, it may not even be that they're being rude. It's just that they're so busy, they've got their own things going on, that they didn't respond to you. So, you know, it's a very hard time for everyone right now. So there's lots of reasons why people aren't as responsive as they might be in the job market. So don't take anything personally and just keep going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, on top of like the great advice that the other speakers mentioned, I think really briefly, like, of course, there are tons of things that you can learn before starting, like, to get involved. But I mean, I had to get a PhD degree, and of course, I'm happy for this. I'm say grateful for the experience that I got to attain. But I think that I could have also gotten, let's say, at least the practical experience that can help me, let's say, work in this industry without getting like a very formal degree. Sure, the PhD is great. I can have it on a frame. Let's say it puts a DR in front of my name and formal documents. I'm very glad for that. But in general, I think that start early and don't expect to learn, let's say, an entire programming language, or don't expect to learn, let's say, 3 semesters of math, advanced math. I don't know, 5 semesters in a university of like advanced, let's say, physics to start working on something. So my advice would be just get your hands dirty as fast as you can. Just find a project that like seems interesting for you, because if you are not interested, of course, you won't continue with it. You won't, let's say, complete it. But find a project that seems interesting and say, okay, in this project, how do they do this X, let's say, function? I'll just learn how to do that, or I'll try to do that by tutorials and try to do something similar. So in this situation, just try to get as much more hands-on experience as you can from an earlier stage. Don't wait till you think you're ready. You're never going to be super ready to get or to do everything that you think you want to do. So just try to get your hands dirty earlier on. That's my main advice.
Thank you so much. This comes to the end of our Q&A panel discussion. And before we answer the questions of our participants, I would like to remind you to fill in the questionnaire we're going to send immediately after the webinar. So you can send your questions to the group chat right now. I can see some people have already sent their questions. So I think we're going to go through them. We're going to take a few questions before we round up. Someone is asking Artemi, from a programming perspective, how much hours is spent on a project on an average? How many lines of code do you write for this project? Also, I heard spaghetti code is common in the field.
It's good. It's a good question. Very lovely. Well, let's say about spaghetti code. I know this concept of this different kind of, like they not only have the spaghetti code, but also the lasagna code and pizza code for people who doesn't know. And it's basically, there is another one, I don't remember, but it's basically on the way how you write your code, because, and the problem of spaghetti code for others, it's just that it's basically one line. Like you don't use the OOP, you don't try to separate your code into parts. So yeah, it happens, but well, it's more about programming in general than in robotics, as I feel. But from robotics part, I would say that you still have some parts of the code which are only responsible for running, let's say, hardware, and there are some nodes which are, I mean, in-ROS nodes, but any other parts of code which are more into software. So for example, if you have your LiDAR or you have your camera, there is going to be a chunk of the code which is only responsible for running your camera and getting the information. And also just use OOP, use the object-oriented programming, make sure that your code is clean, write comments so you're not gonna have this spaghetti problem. But just because robotics in general is hardware and software, you're always gonna have this kind of separation. So I wouldn't say it's a very common problem for spaghetti coding in robotics. Everything is responsible for the thing it's supposed to be for.
Thank you. Our next question is, someone has a question about data ethics. It says, the person says, what should I take into account regarding ethical issues when working in machine learning or robotics? Sot, can you answer that?
I think Max may be more relevant for this question. And if there's anything to complement, I may add, but I think Max has maybe thought more about the ethical, let's say, perspectives of it.
Yeah, so some of my research is about data privacy. I think it's very hard. I think basically as an engineer, you should just be asking questions all the time anyway. But, you know, the broader conversation, a lot of people now want to say that they're AI ethicists because it's sort of become a career in itself. But often they don't actually understand how AI works. So they're asking the wrong questions. And for governments and sort of legal regulatory authorities, it's also hard for them to categorize, you know, what should we be doing and what should we be looking for. So I guess if you're coming at this from a perspective as an engineer, you may have some times in your career where you feel uncomfortable about being asked to do some things. Usually that might relate to sort of biometric data regarding people, you know, people's, you know, medical data or facial recognition or things like that. So I think you should just basically in life, just keep asking questions. And then I think over time, governments will probably catch up to a certain extent in certain places on some of these issues.
Thank you. Someone asks, is MATLAB and Simulink good for robotics? Simulink?
Simulink.
It's the, let's say, simulation environment of MATLAB. So, I mean, I can respond really fast, and Artemi can also help me with that because I haven't used Simulink in a long time. Sure, when I was working with simple engineering problems, MATLAB was, let's say, pretty useful in some modeling, and also Simulink, we used it in some of the research projects. Later in my, let's say, professional career, I didn't use it as much. Like while I was working mainly for robotics, I was using mainly, let's say, ROS and Gazebo for some simulations, like RViz for the visualization, or Gazebo if you want to build like a big simulation environment. And then for some other control systems, we used their own, let's say, and like for NI systems, we used their own, let's say, simulation processes. But it's pretty good for creating models and testing them. So I don't know. As I said, I didn't use it as much later in my professional career. I don't know about Artemi.
Well, yeah, all what you said is definitely right. But I would also say that it's good for trying different algorithms and to try to implement something. I had some algorithms like Kalman filter or maybe dynamic window approach, which are like basic robotics algorithms. Because anyways, you have to have some brief understanding how things work and what is mainly used in a field. So I would say it's a good place for this initial testing and just to, as Sot said, make your hands dirty, get your hands dirty. This is maybe a good platform to start at, whether the MATLAB, or maybe you can do the same in Python as well with visualization.
All right. Thank you. Our next question says, any best recommendation in freelance platform for mechanical engineers?
Temi, do you want to take that?
Oh, I had a list somewhere, like full list of those freelance platforms, but so give me a second, I can look for it and I can actually send it into the chat for others so they can actually look up for the best. But obviously there is a top one. What is this called? The top tier platform. Does anyone remember? I haven't used it for a while. Let me look for it.
Mary, why don't you go on with the next question, and
Okay, yeah.
we can add it in, come back to that in the chat.
Right.
Okay, yeah, so someone asks, sorry, what websites can one find robotics courses, projects, or internships targeted at beginners? So do you want to answer that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound that I'm biased, because I am a little bit biased. That's what we mainly do in Popular Robotics. We have our own platform, Robocity. Check out. It's roboticscareer. And then you can find some free resources about, let's say, introductory courses for robotics. We have online competitions that can help you improve your skills, and also we do have projects by users that you can see and take a look at if you want to get some more experience about how these projects can work. Also, we offer some, let's say, career guides as well. So if you want to get some, let's say, free resources, we also have, let's say, a subscription for getting access to, let's say, more advanced courses. But sure, you can also just find some good free resources on our platform, Robocity. Other than that, of course, as Artemi mentioned as well, there are a lot of other resources we can look into online. It's just, yeah, it's a little bit bits and pieces in different platforms. That's why we created also Robocity, because we want to put things at one specific location.
Right. Thank you. Someone asked, how do you start the learning of robotics after the 12th with the help of computer stream? Do you know what that means?
I think I'm very familiar with the educational system in India. I don't know what after the 12th means. Maybe it's a grade. I think it's a grade in high school. So probably it's like finishing high school. I'm not 100% sure, but it's mainly asking information about how to, let's say, go from being a student to, let's say, working in AI or starting your career as a researcher. So if you can, of course, get on a degree, let's say as an undergrad for, let's say, computer science, engineering, mechanical, electrical engineering, control systems engineering. So you should obviously choose for that. If you don't have the ability to do that for whatever reason, what I mentioned before, go get some online resources. Try to see which part of, let's say, robotics or AI mostly appeals to you. Because what is like something that we haven't mentioned before is like, you may think you like something, like you may think that, oh, robotics sounds so cool, or like, oh, I don't know, you think that working with drones might be so interesting, and then when you actually get to work with that specific part of the drones, you don't really like to do, let's say, hardware assembly, or you're not really interested in, let's say, replacing the rotors of or the copters of the drone. So just try to work on this project a little bit, take some tasks, and then see if this is the one you want to be going with. So just try different things. If you're interested in this field, like, I'm pretty sure you're going to find a direction that like is like working for you. Just try different things, try different projects, and see which aspect works better for you. Online resources, and of course, some experience later, as I said, with internships, or later as you build your skills with freelance projects.
All right, thank you so much. This is how far we'll go today. Thank you thank you to our guest speakers, Max, Anthony, and Sot. If you have any more questions you would like to ask them, you can add them on LinkedIn, and you can add a description of how you know them, for example, through the Popular Robotics webinar. And we're going to send the recording to your emails. And so many people have been asking on the group about the WeChat group. So we're going to send an email with the QR code, so you can join the WeChat group. And don't forget to join, to fill in the survey that we're going to send immediately after this webinar. So thank you so much. That's the end. See you guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.